On the outskirts of a forgotten American town, where the streets were cracked and weeds broke through the sidewalks, stood a small, weather-beaten house. Its paint was chipped and faded, a ghost of the white it once proudly wore. The screen door hung crooked on its hinges, and every gust of wind made it creak like an old man's knees. The porch light flickered on and off, not because anyone turned it on, but because the wiring was faulty and no one had the money to fix it. Inside this tired house lived a girl named Grace Miller. She was 12, though sometimes she felt much older. Life had a way of aging her quietly, slowly, like water wearing down stone. Her days were stitched together with routine: wake up early, eat a cold breakfast if there was any cereal left, walk herself to school in shoes that had long lost their cushioning, and return home to an empty house. Her mother, Laura Miller, was a woman worn thin by life. She had once been vibrant, full of dreams and laughter, but those dreams had been buried beneath double shifts and bills that never stopped coming. Laura cleaned other people's homes during the day, houses that sparkled and smelled like fresh flowers, then served greasy food and tired smiles as a waitress at the local diner until late into the night. They used to be a family of 3. Grace's father, Michael Miller, had been a factory worker. Kind-hearted, quiet, strong. He died in an industrial accident when Grace was just 6. One day he went to work, kissed Grace on the forehead, and never came back. His death left a hole in the family, one that no words or time could fill. He had no life insurance, just broken promises and unpaid rent. Since then, life had narrowed. Grace slept on a small mattress on the floor of her room, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and hand-me-down books from the local church. Her clothes were patched up with mismatched threads, and her backpack had a broken zipper she'd learned to pin closed with a safety clip. She didn't complain. She never did. At school, Grace was a shadow. She sat in the back of every classroom, notebook always open but rarely written in. Her voice barely rose above a whisper when teachers called her name during roll call. She walked with her eyes to the ground, head ducked low, avoiding the mocking stares of other kids who noticed her second-hand clothes and worn shoes. Children whispered behind her back, "Why does she always look like she's from the past? Her mom's that waitress, right? I saw her scrubbing toilets once." But Grace never responded, not because she didn't hear, but because she had learned the hard way that silence hurts less than speaking up. Yet within her, buried deep under layers of self-doubt and silence, lived a voice. She didn't even understand it fully. She just knew that sometimes, late at night, when the house was still and the wind howled outside, she would sing softly to herself. Not loudly. She didn't want her mother to hear it. Personal. Something sacred. Her voice wasn't trained. She had never taken a lesson. But it was real, honest, full of emotion too big for a child her age. When she sang, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel broken. She felt free. Music was her secret. She sang to the stars, to the memory of her father, to the dreams she never spoke aloud. She sang to escape, to heal, to feel something other than the ache of being unseen. No one knew. Not her teachers, not her classmates, not even her mother, who had once been a singer herself before life stole the music from her soul. Grace kept her gift hidden, because in her world, dreams were luxuries, and people like her, they didn't get to dream. It was a chilly Friday morning when Mrs. Riley, the school's friendly but strict music teacher, stepped into the classroom with a bright smile on her face and a clipboard in her hand. She clapped her hands once. "Okay, everyone, listen up. I have a special announcement." The classroom fell into a hush. A few kids still whispered behind their hands, but most turned their eyes toward her. "Next week," Mrs. Riley began with dramatic flair, "is our annual school talent show. This is your chance to shine. If you want to sing, dance, play an instrument, or do anything creative, there's a sign-up sheet outside the music room." A few kids immediately started murmuring with excitement. "I'm doing that Taylor Swift song. I'm going to play drums. My cousin taught me. A mom says I should dance." There was a buzz in the air, a giddy nervousness that only comes from the idea of being seen. But in the very back of the room, Grace Miller stayed quiet. As usual, she stared at her hands folded on her desk, pretending not to hear. The words talent show felt like they belonged to someone else's world, not hers. That's when 2 girls, Madison and Chloe, the self-appointed queens of 6th grade, leaned toward each other, giggling like they'd just come up with the best joke in the world. "I have the perfect idea," Madison whispered with a smirk, her braces flashing in the fluorescent light. "What?" Chloe asked, already grinning. Let's sign up Grace Miller to sing. Chloe gasped dramatically, then covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. She probably sounds like a dying squirrel. The two of them laughed under their breath and scribbled Grace's name onto the sign, up sheet with exaggerated curls and hearts around it, just to make sure everyone knew. Later that day, when Grace walked past the music room and glanced at the sign up sheet, her heart dropped. Grace Miller singing. Her stomach turned cold. She stared at the name, written in big bubbly letters that weren't hers. Her pulse quickened. Her hands trembled. She didn't put her name there. Panic surged in her chest like a rising tide. She rushed to Mrs. Riley, trying to keep her voice steady. I didn't sign up, Grace whispered, pointing to the sheet. Riley adjusted her glasses and looked down at the list. Well, she said with a kind but firm voice, your name is here now. And Grace, everyone deserves a chance. Maybe this is yours. Grace didn't know how to respond. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She just nodded and turned away, her eyes burning with the sting of tears she refused to let fall. That afternoon, Grace walked home slower than usual, her backpack heavy on her shoulders. The clouds above had thickened, and the wind had picked up. Inside her chest, her heart was a knotted mess. What if she went up there and they laughed? What if her voice cracked? What if she froze? Or worse, what if she sang, and no one even cared? That evening, she sat at the small kitchen table while her mother Laura reheated leftovers. The microwave hummed, and the air smelled faintly of overcooked rice. Laura turned to her. You're quiet tonight, she said gently. Grace hesitated, then shook her head. Nothing. But inside, everything felt like something big, something terrifying. She poked at her food and stared out the window, where the wind shook the bare trees. She knew she could back out. She could stay silent, say nothing, let the moment pass. Or she could do the unthinkable, let her voice be heard. That evening, the wind howled outside, brushing against the windows like a restless spirit. Inside the dimly lit kitchen, Grace Miller sat at the small, scratched-up wooden table, her chin resting in her hand. The air was filled with the gentle clinking of a spoon against a pot as her mother stirred a thin soup on the stove, mostly broth and leftover vegetables. Grace's voice came out barely above a whisper. Mom, they signed me up to sing. As a joke, Laura Miller stopped stirring. The silence in the room deepened. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on an old dish towel. Do you want to sing? Grace opened her mouth but didn't answer immediately. Her fingers fiddled with the hem of her sleeve. I don't know, she said honestly. I think I might. But I'm scared. Laura walked over and knelt beside her daughter, gently taking Grace's face in her hands. Her eyes, tired but warm, searched her daughter's. Baby, she said softly, people will always find something to laugh at. That's what they do. But if you sing from your heart, really sing, they'll listen. Even the cruel ones. Grace blinked away the sting in her eyes. Then, without another word, Laura stood up and disappeared into the small hallway. Grace heard the creak of her mother's bedroom door, the soft thuds of boxes being moved. A moment later, Laura returned. Holding something wrapped in a faded blue towel, she placed it on the table and carefully unwrapped it. It was an old cassette player, the kind with chunky buttons and a cloudy plastic window over the tape. The corners were worn, the label on the side half peeled. Laura smiled, a little sadly. Your dad used to love this thing, she said, would play it every weekend. Elvis, Whitney, Aretha, real voices, real soul. Grace looked at it like it was a relic, something magical and fragile. Laura slid a cassette into the player and pressed play. There was a faint click, a whir of the tape spinning, and then a burst of sound filled the kitchen. Warm crackling, full of life. It was Whitney Houston's voice, powerful, aching. Beautiful. Laura whispered, maybe there's something in there that speaks to you. Grace didn't say anything. She just nodded and held the cassette player like it was made of gold. Later that night, after her mother had gone to bed, Grace sat cross-legged by the window, wrapped in a blanket. The night sky stretched endless above her, cold and distant. She slipped on the old headphones, adjusted the clunky foam pads over her ears, and pressed play again. The music filled her, the emotion, the pain, the power. It felt like someone had reached into her chest and unlocked a part of her she didn't know was there. She closed her eyes. She began to hum. Then she began to sing, softly at first, tentatively, like she was testing a secret she wasn't sure she should know. But her voice, untrained, unpolished, was pure, and it carried. Through the silence, through the sadness, through the night. In that moment, Grace wasn't the invisible girl in hand-me-down clothes. She was a girl with a gift, a girl with a voice. And for the first time in a long time, she let it rise. The next afternoon, the school auditorium felt 10 times larger than usual. Its towering red curtains, creaky wooden floorboards, and rows of foldable metal chairs were enough to intimidate anyone. For Grace Miller, stepping onto that stage felt like stepping into a spotlight she had spent her entire life avoiding. Her palms were sweaty. Her knees wobbled with every step. Riley stood near the piano, clipboard in hand. "Okay, Grace, whenever you're ready," she said warmly. Grace swallowed hard and walked to the center of the stage. Her eyes flicked toward the audience. There they were. Madison and Chloe, sitting in the second row with crossed legs and cruel smirks. Madison nudged Chloe and whispered something that made them both giggle behind their hands. Grace looked down at the microphone in front of her. Her heart pounded so loudly in her chest it was hard to hear anything else. Her throat tightened. Her mouth went dry. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out, not a single note. For a few seconds, the silence was deafening. Then it started, the stifled giggles, the fake coughs. The whispers, laughter that wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. Grace's face turned red. Her chest felt tight. Mrs. Riley took a step forward. "It's okay, Grace. Just take your time." Breathe, but Grace couldn't. She couldn't move. She couldn't think. Her vision blurred as her eyes filled with tears. She turned on her heel and ran. Off the stage, down the side stairs, and straight into the hallway. She found the nearest bathroom, darted inside, and locked herself in a stall. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The room was cold and empty. She sat on the closed toilet lid, hugging her arms around herself. She didn't cry. Not then. She just sat there, staring at the scratched-up door in front of her, trying to breathe, trying to swallow the shame, the embarrassment, the sting of being humiliated. A voice inside her whispered, "See, you were never meant to be seen." That night, as the wind rustled the leaves outside their thin bedroom window, Grace sat on her mattress while her mother stirred tea in the kitchen. The soft clink of the spoon was the only sound between them. Laura finally asked, "How was rehearsal?" Grace opened her mouth to say it, to quit. To tell her mother she'd changed her mind, that it was a mistake, that she couldn't do it. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she said, "It was fine." Her mother nodded. She didn't press. Later that night, long after Laura had gone to bed, Grace stood in front of the mirror with a wooden spoon in her hand. She stared at her reflection, her oversized t-shirt, her messy hair, the fear still lurking in her eyes. Then, softly, she sang. It was quiet, broken, raw, but it was hers. She sang into the spoon, then into a hairbrush. She stood on top of her bed and whispered lyrics into the darkness. She sang for no one, but she sang for herself. Her voice cracked. She missed notes. Her throat burned. But she kept going, because deep inside her, past the shame and the fear and the bruises of being laughed at, was something more powerful than any joke. Hope. She wasn't ready to give up just yet. The school auditorium hummed with anticipation. Rows of folding chairs were filled with parents holding up phones, teachers whispering program notes, and students shifting in their seats. The stage lights glowed warm against the maroon curtains. Laughter echoed off the walls after a boy in suspenders finished a comedy skit about cafeteria food. Backstage, Grace Miller stood frozen behind the curtain. Her palms were damp. Her knees wobbled. The cassette player her mother had given her sat in her backpack, tucked safely away like a lucky charm. She had practiced every night for a week, until her throat was raw, until her heart stopped pounding when she imagined this moment. But standing here, in front of real people, her stomach was in knots. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her simple, second-hand floral dress. No rhinestones, no stage makeup, just clean and pressed with care. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, a single ribbon trailing down like a whisper of grace. On stage, another student wrapped up a tap dance routine to scattered applause. Then came the moments. Riley's voice crackled over the microphone. And now, singing Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. Please welcome, Grace Miller. The room stirred, a few whispers, a few curious glances. In the audience, Madison and Chloe leaned forward, grinning, not with anticipation, but with the kind of cruelty only middle school girls can perfect. Grace walked out onto the stage. The spotlight hit her like a wave of heat. The microphone stood tall and still at center stage. The auditorium quieted, part confusion, part expectation. This was the girl who never spoke. The girl with the worn-out sneakers. She stepped up to the mic, took a breath, and for 1 second, the world held still. Then she began. At first her voice was a whisper, soft, shaky, almost like it might break before the first line ended. I heard there was a secret chord. A few kids in the back snickered. Madison rolled her eyes, but Grace didn't stop. She closed her eyes and kept going. That David played and it pleased the Lord. Her voice deepened, not in volume, but in truth. Each word rolled out with quiet power. She wasn't just singing notes. She was telling a story of loss of hope, of aching faith. But you don't really care for music, do you? Her tone held the wariness of late nights waiting for her mother to come home. The chill of walking to school alone. The silent ache of being overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. The baffled king composing Hallelujah. By the time she reached the chorus, the laughter was gone. The whispering stopped. The room had transformed. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the fluorescent buzz of the ceiling lights seemed to quiet, as if the building itself was listening. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Each note soared, not with volume, but with conviction. It was a voice that shouldn't have come from a 12-year-old. It was too deep. Too full. Somewhere in the back row, Principal Daniels reached for a tissue, wiping at her eyes discreetly. Mrs. Riley's hands were clasped to her chest. Even the custodian paused in the hallway, drawn in by the sound of something remarkable. Grace sang like the world was finally listening, and for the first time in her life they were. When she reached the final line, her voice didn't rise. It fell gentle and low like a prayer spoken through tears. Hallelujah, then silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but sacred. And then, a single clap, then another, until the entire auditorium rose to their feet, a standing ovation. Not polite earnest. Some clapped through tears. Some cheered like they were trying to lift her up on sound alone. Even Madison and Chloe sat stunned, not clapping, but not smirking either. Grace didn't smile, not yet. She simply looked out into the sea of faces, the flood of light. And for once, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. She walked off stage slowly, her heart beating steady, not from fear, but from something new. Pride. There was no background track, no instruments, no piano, no harmonies, just Grace Miller's voice, bare, trembling, and strong. Each note she sang was like a stone dropped into a still lake, sending quiet ripples through the hearts of everyone listening. The auditorium had never been this quiet, not even during fire drills. Teachers leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Parents sat frozen, some gripping the edges of their seats, others holding tissues in stunned disbelief. Even Madison and Chloe, who had laughed at her just days before, were now staring with mouths parted and eyes wide. Chloe's phone, which she had lifted to record for laughs, now hung forgotten in her lap. A woman in the second row, a mother who didn't even know Grace, pressed a hand to her chest as her eyes welled with tears. Her daughter, sitting beside her, whispered, "She's amazing," and the woman could only nod. And then Grace sang the final line. Her voice didn't soar, it fell, soft as a feather, yet heavy with everything she carried inside. And even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of Song, with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. That last word stretched out like a thread of light, delicate and pure. She held it, let it fade. The microphone picked up her final breath, soft, shaky, holy. Then she stepped back from the mic, and for one long, echoing moment there was nothing. No clapping, no shuffling, just silence. The kind of silence that meant the world had stopped. And in that silence, Grace stood still. She stared out into the sea of faces, her chest rising and falling, her small hands hanging at her sides. She blinked. Was it over? Had she ruined it? Did they hate it? Then one person clapped, a single, slow, deliberate pair of hands. It was Mrs. Riley, the music teacher, standing with tears streaming down her face. Then another clap, a teacher in the back row. Then the entire front row stood, and suddenly the entire auditorium erupted a thunderous, full-bodied standing ovation. It hit Grace like a wave. The clapping, the cheering, the whistles, the thunder of feet on the wooden floor. It surrounded her. It swallowed her. It lifted her. Some students jumped to their feet. Some parents cried openly. The principal was dabbing her eyes with a napkin from her purse. And through it all, Grace just stood there, frozen, shocked. She had prepared for silence, for snickers, for disappointment. But this was something she had never even let herself imagine. She wasn't invisible anymore. In that moment, Grace Miller was radiant, not because of the applause, not because of the voices cheering her name, but because she had done something terrifying, something brave. She had been seen, truly seen, for the first time. And the world had answered not with laughter but with love. The curtains had barely closed when the crowd swarmed. Grace Miller didn't know where to look, where to walk, how to even breathe. People surrounded her, not just students, but parents, teachers, strangers who had never once said her name before. "Who are you?" asked a father, his eyes still glassy. "You made me cry," whispered Miss Caldwell, the 7th grade math teacher who never smiled. She was holding a tissue and looking at Grace like she had seen something sacred. The principal pushed through the crowd with purposeful steps. She didn't say a word at first. She just hugged Grace tightly. No formalities, no permission, just pure human emotion. And then she stepped back, hands on Grace's shoulders. "Grace," she said, eyes brimming, "you have a gift. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Grace could only nod. Her throat was thick with something that wasn't fear this time. It was wonder, disbelief across the auditorium. Madison and Chloe sat in stunned silence. They weren't laughing anymore. They couldn't. Their little prank had backfired in the most unexpected, unforgettable way. People now looked at Grace like she was someone, like she mattered. And that was new. Later that night, the porch light flickered as usual, but the night felt different. Grace sat beside her mother, Ruth Miller, on their small front porch. The evening breeze stirred the air. Their soup bowls sat empty between them. They hadn't said much since the show, but now, Grace turned slowly. "I didn't know I could do that," she whispered. Ruth smiled, the kind of smile that held years of belief no one else had ever seen. "I always knew," she said softly. "I just needed you to know it too." The cassette player sat quietly by the door, still humming with the echoes of Whitney and Aretha, of a past life and a future now rushing forward. A few days later it started small, a video someone had taken, grainy from the middle row. Grace's voice. That final line, it hit the internet like lightning. "This girl sings like an angel, raw talent, soulful. Who is she?" The views climbed, the shares multiplied. Then, the local news van pulled up to the school. A reporter interviewed her in the music room, in front of the piano she had never touched. They aired the story on the evening broadcast. Her name appeared in bold letters across the screen. Grace Miller, the voice from nowhere. The next day, an envelope arrived, a scholarship, a full ride to a prestigious performing arts academy in the city. When her mother opened the letter, she sat down slowly at the kitchen table and just stared at it. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. For the first time in years, they weren't from exhaustion, they were from hope. And just like that, Grace Miller was no longer the girl who faded into the background, no longer the one who ate lunch alone, no longer just a name whispered in jokes. She had been heard, she had been seen. And now, she would never be visible again. Years passed. The creaky old house on the edge of town eventually faded into memory, but the story that began inside its peeling walls would be told again and again. Grace Miller grew up, and she didn't just grow, she soared. She trained, she performed, she poured her soul into every note, and somewhere along the way, the world started to take notice. Her first album was released on a rainy Thursday. It was titled Alleluia in the Silence. Critics called it haunting, beautiful, soul-bearing. The album cover was simple, a close-up of her face, eyes closed, lips slightly parted as if mid-song. No makeup, no flash, just Grace. The same way she had first stood on that school stage years before, bare, trembling, and real. But even as the stages got bigger and the lights got brighter, she never forgot the girl she once was. The girl with holes in her shoes, the girl who sang into a hairbrush in a dark bedroom, the girl who was signed up for a joke and walked away with a purpose. In interviews, she always told the story. It started with a prank, she would say with a soft smile. "2 girls signed me up for the school talent show as a joke. They thought it'd be funny. I almost didn't go through with it." She'd pause, remembering the fear, the silence, the microphone, her voice, but that moment, it changed my life. It showed me I had something inside me, something no one could take away. She never named the girls. She never needed to. It wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation. Sometimes when she was alone backstage before a concert, Grace would hold her necklace, a small silver music note her mom gave her the day she left for the city, and whisper a thank you to the silence. Because it was in that silence that she first heard her own voice. Because a quiet girl made the world stop and listen. And now, the world would never stop listening. As soft piano music plays and images of Grace's journey fade in and out, her childhood home, the school stage the moment she sings, and finally a sold-out concert stage bathed in light. These words echo like a heartbeat. Sometimes the ones we laugh at are the ones meant to move us. Sometimes, a whisper becomes the loudest sound in the room. And sometimes, a poor little girl sings, and the world never forgets her voice.